It is time for our first keynote, and to introduce our keynote, it's my great pleasure to introduce to the stage someone who is going to talk about my two really, really important keywords: inspiration and education. How wonderful in the same sentence, inspiration and education. So can I please invite to the stage Mr. David Airy, from the University of Surrey in the UK, and our fourth UNWTO Ulysses laureate. Sir, I am honored. Thank you. And this is your slide changer.
The pleasure is all mine. And it is, I'm actually very, very pleased to be able, and honored to be able to introduce a man who's a friend, who I've known for about 20 years. I mean, we've worked together, we've published together, we've done research together, we've traveled together. In fact, I think at some points his wife said he saw more of me than he saw of her. But it's Professor Richard Butler. Richard Butler this year is the recipient of the Ulysses Prize for his contribution to scholarship and knowledge, and hence he knows he's already a prize winner, and he will be on the stage on Wednesday evening, so you'll get to see him again. It's my job now just to say a few words about him, to introduce him, who will then give you his address. For those who don't know him, I'll just give you one or two facts about him. He was born in England, but he actually spent much of his upbringing in Scotland, which comes in a little bit later. Another interesting thing, I think it's always interesting to reflect on, Dick, for those of you who don't know, is the short English word for Richard. Dick's father was in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War and was killed before Dick was born. So hence Dick does really represent that generation, of which I am also a part, which grew up in Europe post-1945. I mean, it's a very, very important and interesting generation, that, the so-called baby boomer generation, who did bring a lot of interesting and innovative thinking, which we see today, and in groups like the Rolling Stones and artists like David Hockney. It was a new beginning, and Dick is very much a part of that, very much a part of that as far as tourism is concerned. He was educated at the University of Nottingham, where he studied geography, and at the University of Glasgow, where he did his PhD. He then moved to Canada and spent more than 20 years of his working life at the University of Western Ontario, where he was professor of geography, and he spent a time as the head of the Department of Geography at Canada. But the pull of the United Kingdom brought him back to the UK with his wife and by then 3 children. He moved back to the UK in 1997, where I worked with him for many years at the University of Surrey, but the pull of Scotland was even stronger, and he returned to Scotland in 2003, which was where he now lives with his wife. But we are honoured with his presence here today because he happens with his wife at present to be in New Zealand, staying with one of their daughters. So he's actually come from the other side of the world to be with us today. And Dick, it's a great pleasure to see you here. Just a few words about Dick's contribution. Those of you who have studied tourism, and I'm sure there are many of you who are in the room have studied tourism, and even if you haven't, will probably know Dick through the work that he did on identifying that tourist destinations go through life cycles. Like all activities, they have periods where they develop, they have periods where they grow, and they have periods where they go into decline. That so-called tourism area life cycle, commonly known as the TALC, is what Dick, above all, has given to the study of tourism. It has certainly influenced every generation of tourism scholars. It's also influenced every generation of those who've been interested in the development of tourist resorts. Dick led the original thinking on that on a paper which he published in 1980, and it is the most cited paper that has ever been produced in our field, Dick's tourism area life cycle. He's not only known for that, he's known for his work on sustainability, and I think he's going to be talking about sustainability later. He's also known for his work on seasonality. So seasonality and sustainability, two of the important issues that all tourism destinations face. Final few words, just an indication of how prolific he has been as a scholar. He has supervised more than 30 PhD students. I don't know if there are any in the room. There probably are. They're scattered all over the world. He's authored 17 books and over 100 academic papers. An absolute scholar in our field. And it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be able to welcome Dick to join us here today and to give this keynote address. Dick, over to you.
Excuse me. Just... Well, thank you, David, and thank you to UNWTO for inviting me here. It is a great honor to be here and the opportunity to give this talk. It's a rather over-generous introduction. Whether I can live up to that, I'm not sure. A couple of days ago, I was in the other side of the world in New Zealand, and I was watching my 2-year-old granddaughter, and she was in her bed. She had her night bottle of milk with one hand, and she had her father's iPad in the other, which she was attuning to a Disney cartoon. And I looked in to say goodnight to her, and I thought, my God, I'm too old for the bottle, and I'm too old to operate the iPad. And I thought, you know, having a 72-year-old retired academic come to talk about innovation is maybe not the greatest idea, because at some point we do lose our ability to be innovative and exciting and dynamic. Hopefully, I've got a little bit left, but we'll see how it goes. But it is a great opportunity just now to talk a little bit about tourism, the direction and orientation it might take, and a little bit about the future. I promise not to mention the talc. I'm going to be rather critical of sustainability, and I'm not going to mention seasonality. So, innovation and innovations are terms that many use rather carelessly in a lot of cases. And in tourism, we are as guilty of this as many other industries. Much of what we talk about as innovation is not really true innovation. It's a combination of 1, 2, or 3 other features: adoption, adaptation, and application. And I'll return to those in a moment. To me, having been involved in tourism for 50 years now, it's always represented a perpetual paradox, balancing between inertia on the one hand and dynamism and innovation on the other, for almost all of its millennia of existence. The vast majority of people are wary, if not worried, about change, and particularly as they get older, they are more concerned and less supportive of change. They feel most comfortable with things, places, processes with which they are familiar. They are the allocentrics of Plug's old model from the 1980s, even if things aren't that simple. The fact remains that much of tourism is repetition. Some elements evolving, being modified to fit a continuously changing market and, of course, changing tastes and preferences. Thus, for all our improvements and innovations in transport, in accommodation, in facilities, in services, in communications, many people still head for the coastal resorts to enjoy the seaside as they did 2 millennia ago. Or they come to the great cities of the world like Madrid, Rome, London, New York, and so forth. And as a geographer, when I look at the global patterns of tourism movement, they are broadly similar to what they were 50 years ago when I started in tourism. Europe and North America may have declined somewhat in relative importance and in the proportion of visitors, but overall the movement of people around the world on holiday is fairly stable. We are still waiting, hopefully not in vain, for large numbers of major long-term successful tourism developments in the Middle East, in North Africa and Central Africa and South America that rival those that have appeared for many years in Europe, in North America, and most recently in Southeast Asia. Inertia, reluctance to change, and of course, major existing investment in infrastructure, in services, keeps tourism on a fairly conservative course in terms of its general spatial patterns. If you doubt people's reluctance to change their mindset, then I suggest you look in your own homes, and you'll probably find things that you bought full of good intention to use and still keep. In the garage, perhaps skis, bicycles, you may have still gymnasium memberships, club memberships, second homes, time sharing, all of which you intended to spend the rest of your life doing, that represent sizable investments in equipment and facilities, which maybe you're not using as much as you meant to when you got them, but tend to tie your mind to certain forms of behavior. On the other hand, we have dynamism. We have the elements that encourage and benefit most from innovation, the things that many of you are going to talk about later on this afternoon. And the dynamic element of tourism is the part which is pushed and encouraged most of all by governments, by the media, by the producers of tourism, because nothing sells like new. Renovated, but new is the key thing. But I would argue that in tourism, much of the true dynamism and innovation is on the edges of tourism, the edges spatially and functionally. We see new resorts in new areas, we see new opportunities in new facilities, many of them close to the established locations and offering modifications of established patterns of behavior. What we see mostly are variations on established themes: adoption, adaptation, and application. The adoption of techniques, of products, materials, ideas, engineering, telecommunications, and marketing from other areas of economic activity well integrated into tourism. So innovations in transport, for example, have been seized on by the tourism industry ever since and before Thomas Cook and others first thought about using mass forms of transportation for mass forms of leisure, because they allow consumers to travel more quickly, more widely, more safely, more comfortably, and in greater numbers than ever before. And those are the hallmarks of true innovations. Every form of transport that we have come up with has been utilized for leisure and tourism interests in order to get us to places of leisure, or they have become forms of leisure. The emergency over-snow vehicle became adopted by the tourism industry, adapted and converted into the snowmobile. And from the snowmobile, we got the jet ski. Flying machines of all types, as they have been innovated over the years, have become the workhorse of tourist travel, but small planes, microlights, drones, wingsuits have all become leisure facilities in their own right. It's the adoption of the changed, not always new technology, and its subsequent adaptation and application that has proved the key to the ongoing dynamism in tourism. The industry has modified and adapted innovations in transport, electronic communication, food processing, accommodation design, and applied them brilliantly in a tourism context. Not everything's new, but we have had some truly innovative ideas. It's 60 years ago last year that Disney opened the first of the theme parks, the first experience in a fantasy world into tourism, which we now take as part and parcel of life. And the innovation and the spread of that from a particular area in the world into videos, into communications, into toys, into heaven knows what. So the limitation in innovation and the fact we adopt and we adapt and we apply is not a criticism of tourism. I think we are an outstanding example of how to do that, how to take advantage of improvements in technology and adapt them to what we want. And probably most recently, the use of the World Wide Web for booking, for reserving, for planning our holidays is the best example. And I'm sure we're going to hear more of that later, particularly from Mr. Masato and Mr. McCabe with their presentations. So many of these innovations and modifications have let us progress further with greater refinement in our tourist attractions and in our tourist activities, rather than changing them completely. We have a far wider choice of destination, of types of holidays, a range of accommodation and services, and of activities that we can engage in. Although we have not changed as much as the options available to us. Our basic behavior patterns on holiday are very much the same as they were 2,000 years ago. Wine, women and song, wine, men and song, depending on your preference, the beach, the sun, eating, culture, and so on. Places look very different now from their appearance even 50 years ago when I was growing up, but our behavior patterns have not changed that much. And that should help us predict what we might do in the future and what we might see. Now, I added the phrase beyond sustainability to the title of my talk, because I think we do need to go beyond sustainability. And in fact, and it may come as a surprise for me to say it, we need to go outside of sustainability. I'm not talking about going even more green, about advocating less travel, less flying, higher wages, better working conditions in the industry, world peace and justice. Great though all of those things are. But I mean making sure that tourism is better able to withstand the criticisms it gets now and the criticisms it's going to get even more in the future, and to safeguard the resources on which tourism and tourists depend, and continue to bring the financial benefits and enjoyment to so many people. Now, I am not against sustainability. As a geographer, my whole background and training and what I was teaching in resource management leads me to believe that it is the ideal. I think it is, as Makula Moisey described it, however, a guiding fiction. It is something to which we might aspire, we might desire, but which we're never going to get. And I say that is true for tourism, and it is for many other economic activities. But it is particularly true for tourism. The thing which makes tourism unique is its movement. The fact that the movement of people from one place to another for holiday and back home is the key thing about tourism. It is what makes us unique and what makes tourism tourism. Without that movement, tourism does not exist. But we know very well, if we're honest, the transport that is involved in that, at the heart of tourism, can never be sustainable as things exist at the moment. We are totally dependent on fossil fuels. We have no choice. We cannot move 1 billion people millions of kilometers without using unsustainable fossil fuels. Transport in tourism is the elephant in the room, the thing we don't want to talk about. So if tourism is to continue, and one hopes it does, of course, on its scale and grow even larger and more innovative, it cannot be purely sustainable. Individual operations, the accommodation units, the enterprises we're talking about later on today, can and indeed should be as sustainable as possible to reduce energy costs, to reduce their own costs, to make them more profitable. Keep using the towels another day. It's a cheap and effective and beneficial action. Aim to reduce energy and so forth. Making tourism more sustainable is better. It's much better than talking about sustainable tourism. Because sustainable tourism implies we're going to change tourism. And quite honestly, I don't think we are, I don't think we're able to, and I'm not sure that we should. I think sustainable tourism is a term which unfortunately has become mired down in baggage and too many other things with it. So I think we need to move beyond it. We keep the goals of being as energy conscious, as environmentally conscious as we can be. But I think we need to complement the idea of sustainability with the concept of resilience. Resilience, I would suggest, is a word you are going to hear a lot more about. It doesn't imply judgments. It applies in the concept of a process to make the places, the destinations to which tourism goes, better able to withstand the pressures of tourism. Resilience comes from natural sciences. It's a measure of the persistence of systems and their ability to absorb change and still maintain their same relationship, similar to sustainability. It's how natural systems survive. And in tourism, if we are honest, in the destinations, it's a question of how do we make them survive? How do we make them survive 1 billion tourists a year? So there are three things we need to consider in that. Resistance. How easy or difficult it is to change a community. The greater the resistance, the harder it is to change the community. Secondly, latitude. The extent, we need to find the extent to which a community can accept change and not be permanently changed, but can live with that change. And thirdly, precarious. How close to irrevocable change and perhaps destruction are communities, ones that will go beyond the point of recovery. So we need to concentrate more, I think, on the shocks and making destinations better able to withstand the shocks, the pressures of tourism, so that the destinations, their attractions, their resources, their communities can better survive the impacts of tourism. And in many situations, those destinations that have proved most resilient to tourism are those that have remained most attractive to tourism. It's not a question of altering things, which is always difficult, to make them fit tourism. It's a question of accommodation, of integrating the effects of tourism, the characteristics of the destinations, and making them fit. We're talking about control and coordination, not abandoning sustainability, but I think being more realistic, recognizing we will not get totally sustainable, and making the destinations and their communities better able to withstand the effects over time. The 1 billion travelers each year are not all tourists, as we understand the term. That is, they're not leisure travelers, they are travelers. But the number of what we might call proper tourists is obviously many hundreds of million a year. I don't think they should be seen as a problem. I think having millions of tourists traveling each year is a magnificent achievement. It poses difficulties, but so do many other things. Earlier this month, UNWTO announced the Lifetime Achievement Award to the late Arthur Hullo for his work on social tourism, the idea that tourism should become available to all. Now, not many of those billion travelers are social tourists, but we should rejoice to be able to see so many people traveling for pleasure. While the numbers pose difficulties and they pose problems and they create unwanted effects in some places, that's no reason to damn tourism or, for example, to use the threat of climate change to reduce individual travel. Bringing pleasure to people, or as we do in tourism, bring people to pleasure, is a praiseworthy goal, I think it is, and it's not something to be condemned. We must make sure that we develop and expand tourism in appropriate ways to maximize the benefits, economic, social, ecological, and to minimize the unwanted results. If we're going to achieve this, it will require ongoing innovation, and as well as the innovation in tourism, to adopt, to adapt, and to apply the innovations that are going on outside tourism. Sometimes I think we are guilty of looking too much inside tourism. There is so much more going on outside that we need to take advantage of. We've done that well in the past. I think the key to the future is to continue to be able to adopt, adapt, and apply those innovations from outside. Thank you.